Have you ever met someone who left such a deep impression that years later you still find yourself thinking about them? Not romantically, but psychologically. Something about them changed how you see the world, how you see yourself, and you can't quite shake their influence. There's actually a scientific reason why certain people become permanently etched into our neural pathways. INFJs don't just meet people, they create psychological imprints that the brain literally cannot erase. Today, we're uncovering the neurological mechanisms that make INFJs unforgettable, including the mirror effect and why your mind treats them like an unsolved mystery. But understanding why you're remembered is only half the story. There is one specific neurological trigger INFJs pull without even trying, and it's the reason people feel exposed in your presence. Before we start, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe so you won't miss any of our weekly deep dives into the world of personality types. And if you're looking for a deeper understanding of yourself and your INFJ personality, browse our favorite INFJ products in the description and click the link in the comments to take our favorite free personality test, the mirror effect, reflecting your hidden self. The primary reason people can't forget INFJs lies in something psychologists call the mirror effect. When you interact with most people, you're engaging with their social persona, the version of themselves they've constructed for public consumption. But INFJs operate differently. Their dominant cognitive function, introverted intuition, processes information in a way that bypasses surface level interactions entirely. Here's what actually happens in an INFJ's brain during conversation. While you're speaking, they're not just listening to your words. Their neural networks are simultaneously analyzing your micro expressions, vocal tonality, word choice patterns, and behavioral inconsistencies. They're running background calculations that most people aren't even aware are possible. This isn't conscious analysis, it's their brain's default operating system. Now, this next part is where things get truly unsettling for the other person, because the INFJ isn't just seeing who you are now, they're seeing something you haven't even become yet. The result is that INFJs see past your carefully constructed social mask and perceive the authentic version of yourself that you might not even recognize. When they respond to you, they're responding to who you actually are, not who you're pretending to be. This creates a profound psychological experience for the other person. Think about the last time someone truly saw you. Not your achievements, not your role, not your social status, but the real you beneath all the performance. That recognition creates what neuroscientists call a neural signature, a specific pattern of brain activity associated with being authentically perceived. This signature gets encoded into long-term memory with unusual strength because it represents something most people rarely experience. The mirror effect explains why conversations with INFJs feel different. You walk away feeling like someone finally understood you, but also slightly unsettled because they reflected back aspects of yourself you hadn't consciously acknowledged. This cognitive dissonance, the gap between how you see yourself and how they see you, creates what researchers call elaborative encoding. Your brain works harder to process and store memories that challenge your existing self-concept. What makes this particularly powerful is that INFJs don't just mirror your current self, they mirror your potential. Their pattern recognition abilities allow them to see trajectories in your behavior that predict future growth or decline. They might comment on a strength you didn't know you possessed or warn you about a pattern that could become problematic. When their predictions prove accurate months or years later, it reinforces the neural pathways associated with that person, making them even more unforgettable. The authenticity of INFJ perception also triggers what psychologists call attachment system activation. Humans have a fundamental need to be known and accepted for who they truly are. Most relationships operate on conditional acceptance. People like you as long as you maintain certain behaviors or meet certain expectations. But when an INFJ sees your authentic self and still chooses to engage positively, it activates deep-seated attachment mechanisms that evolved to help us form crucial survival bonds. This is why people often describe feeling safe with INFJs, even when the INFJ is pointing out uncomfortable truths. The safety doesn't come from the content of what they're saying. It comes from the recognition that they see you completely and haven't rejected you. This experience of unconditional positive regard while being fully perceived is so rare that it creates what memory researchers call a flashbulb memory. The kind of vivid, detailed recollection usually reserved for traumatic or extremely significant events. The mirror effect also explains why people replay INFJ encounters obsessively. Your brain keeps returning to these interactions because they contain information about yourself that you're still processing. The INFJ showed you something about your own psychology that you hadn't integrated yet, so your mind keeps revisiting the conversation, trying to extract additional insights. This is fundamentally different from how most people impact us. Usually, we remember people for what they did or said. With INFJs, we remember them for what they revealed about us. They become associated not with external events, but with internal revelations about our own nature. And since self-knowledge is one of the most persistent human drives, the person who facilitated that knowledge becomes permanently significant in our psychological landscape. Most people think being seen is why they remember you, but there's a much more addictive reason. A psychological glitch that makes your absence more distracting than your presence. The Zeigarnik Effect, the unsolved mystery. There's another psychological mechanism that makes INFJs impossible to forget, and it has to do with how the human brain responds to incomplete information. The Zeigarnik Effect, discovered by psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, demonstrates that our minds have an almost compulsive need to complete unfinished patterns and solve unsolved puzzles. INFJs, whether consciously or unconsciously, exploit this cognitive bias in a way that makes them permanently lodged in other people's memory systems. Here's the key insight. INFJs operate on what I call the 90-10 rule. Most people miss this next detail, but it's the secret to why INFJs are never solved. They'll share 90% of their thoughts, feelings, and perspectives with you, but they always hold back that final 10%. If you don't understand this final 10%, you'll never understand the INFJ's power. This isn't manipulation, it's a natural result of their complex inner world and their instinctive understanding that complete transparency can be overwhelming for others. But this selective sharing creates what psychologists call cognitive open loops in the minds of people they interact with. Your brain encounters an INFJ who seems incredibly deep, insightful, and authentic. They share profound thoughts about life, offer perspectives you've never considered, and demonstrate an understanding of human nature that feels almost supernatural. But just when you think you're beginning to understand them completely, you realize there are entire dimensions of their personality that remain hidden. They reference experiences they don't fully explain, hint at knowledge they don't completely share, or display reactions that suggest complex emotional landscapes you haven't been given access to. This incompleteness triggers the Zeigarnik Effect. Your brain categorizes the INFJ as an unsolved puzzle that demands resolution, unlike a completed interaction that your mind can file away and potentially forget. An incomplete understanding of someone creates persistent mental activity. Your subconscious keeps running background processes, trying to fill in the missing pieces, trying to solve the mystery of who this person really is beneath the surface. The neurological reality is that incomplete patterns require more cognitive resources to maintain than complete ones. When you fully understand someone, your brain can create a simple mental model and move on. But when someone remains partially mysterious, your neural networks have to keep the file active, constantly updating and revising your understanding as new information becomes available. This ongoing mental activity makes the person significantly more memorable than someone you've figured out completely. INFJs amplify this effect through their natural contradiction between their quiet exterior and their profound inner complexity. On the surface, they often appear reserved, contemplative, maybe even unremarkable. They listen more than they speak, observe more than they participate, and seem comfortable existing on the periphery of social situations. But when they do engage, when they share their thoughts or offer their perspectives, it's revelatory. The contrast between their understated presence and their remarkable depth creates cognitive dissonance that your brain struggles to resolve. This mystery isn't just about what they think, it's about how they think. INFJs process information in ways that seem almost alien to most people. They make connections that others miss, see implications that aren't obvious, and arrive at conclusions through intuitive leaps that they can't always explain logically. When they share these insights, you're left wondering not just what else they know, but how their mind works so differently from yours. The addictive quality of trying to figure out an INFJ stems from the fact that every interaction reveals new layers while simultaneously suggesting even deeper complexities you haven't accessed yet. It's like reading a book where each chapter answers some questions but poses even more intriguing ones. Your brain becomes invested in solving the puzzle, And that investment creates lasting neural pathways associated with that person. Now, everything I've just told you about mystery won't work if you don't have this next element. This one shift in frequency is what turns a memorable person into an irreplaceable one. The emotional anchor, deep validation in a shallow world. What makes INFJs truly unforgettable isn't just that they see you, it's the quality of emotional validation they provide. In a world where most interactions operate at surface level, INFJs offer something that feels revolutionary: the experience of being genuinely understood rather than simply heard. Here's the critical distinction. Most people listen to respond. They're waiting for their turn to speak, formulating their own thoughts, or trying to relate your experience to something in their own life. But INFJs listen to understand. Their brain's natural empathy circuits create what neuroscientists call neural mirroring. They literally experience echoes of your emotional state in their own neural networks. When you're talking to an INFJ about something that matters to you, their mirror neurons are firing in response to your emotional expressions. They're not just intellectually grasping what you're going through, they're feeling resonant emotions in their own system. This creates a form of validation that most people never experience. Someone who understands your feelings not because they've had similar experiences, but because they're actually experiencing diluted versions of those emotions alongside you. This empathic resonance triggers powerful neurochemical responses. When someone truly attunes to your emotional state, your brain releases oxytocin, the same bonding hormone involved in parent-child attachment and romantic pair bonding. But unlike these other relationships, the oxytocin response to INFJ validation comes without agenda. They're not trying to fix you, change you, or get something from you. They're simply witnessing your emotional reality and accepting it completely. The psychological impact of this unfiltered acceptance is profound. Most people spend their lives managing how much of their authentic emotional range they reveal to others. We learn early that certain feelings make people uncomfortable, that some struggles are too much to share, that vulnerability often leads to judgment or unwanted advice. So we develop emotional masks, showing only the socially acceptable portions of our inner experience. Then an INFJ comes along and creates what psychologists call psychological safety, an environment where you can express your full emotional spectrum without fear of rejection or judgment. They don't minimize your pain by saying, "At least it's not worse." They don't dismiss your fears by calling them irrational. They don't try to cheer you up when you need to feel sad. They simply hold space for whatever you're experiencing. This acceptance of your complete emotional range creates what researchers call a corrective emotional experience. For many people, it's the first time they've been allowed to be fully human in front of another person. The relief and validation of this experience gets encoded into memory with extraordinary strength because it represents a fundamental human need being met: the need to be known and accepted in your totality. What makes this particularly unforgettable is the contrast effect. After experiencing genuine emotional attunement with an INFJ, surface-level relationships feel hollow by comparison. You become aware of how much emotional labor you typically do in relationships, how much you edit yourself, manage others' comfort levels, or perform emotional states you don't actually feel. The INFJ showed you what it feels like to simply exist authentically in a relationship, and that becomes your new reference point. This validation also becomes a source of internal strength. Years later, when you're struggling with self-doubt or facing difficult emotions, you remember that someone saw your authentic self and found it worthy of acceptance. That memory becomes what psychologists call an internal secure base, a psychological resource you can draw on when you need to remember your own worth. The INFJ becomes permanently associated with your sense of fundamental acceptability as a human being, which is why their influence persists long after the relationship itself may have ended. The conviction paradox: living authentically in an inauthentic world. There's another psychological mechanism that makes INFJs impossible to erase from memory, and it centers on something most people talk about but rarely demonstrate: authentic living. The conviction paradox explains why witnessing someone who actually lives by their values creates such a lasting psychological impact. Most people operate with what psychologists call value behavior gaps. They know what they believe is right, they can articulate their principles clearly, but their daily choices often contradict these stated values. This isn't necessarily hypocrisy, it's human nature. Living authentically requires enormous psychological energy, constant self-reflection, and the willingness to choose meaning over comfort repeatedly. INFJs, however, have spent years examining their values from every conceivable angle. Their dominant introverted intuition function compels them to understand not just what they believe, but why they believe it and what it would actually mean to live according to those principles. This isn't casual self reflection, it's intensive psychological archaeology, digging through their motivations, fears, and assumptions until they reach bedrock truth about what matters to them. The result is that INFJs make choices that seem incomprehensible to others because those choices align with internal values rather than external expectations. They'll walk away from lucrative career opportunities that compromise their integrity. They'll speak uncomfortable truths in situations where silence would be socially safer. They'll defend people who are being treated unfairly, even when that defense comes at personal cost. They'll create art that expresses their authentic vision rather than what the market demands. What makes this psychologically unforgettable is its rarity. Most people have never actually witnessed someone consistently choosing values over convenience. We're accustomed to seeing people compromise, rationalize, and adapt their principles to fit their circumstances. Then we encounter an INFJ who's genuinely trying to live in alignment with their deepest convictions, and it challenges everything we thought we knew about human nature. This creates what researchers call cognitive restructuring. In the observer, your existing mental models about how people behave get disrupted. You realize that authentic living isn't just a philosophical concept, it's actually possible. Someone is doing it right in front of you, making the difficult choices you've convinced yourself are unrealistic or naive. The psychological impact extends beyond admiration. Witnessing authentic living forces you to examine your own compromises. You start questioning the gap between your stated values and your actual behavior. You begin to wonder what your life would look like if you made decisions based on what you actually believe rather than what feels safe or profitable or socially acceptable. This internal examination process creates what psychologists call moral elevation, a specific emotional state triggered by witnessing virtue in action. Your brain releases dopamine and creates new neural pathways associated with the possibility of living more authentically. The INFJ becomes permanently linked to this elevated state and the vision of who you could become if you had their courage. The conviction paradox also explains why INFJs often make people uncomfortable while simultaneously attracting them. Their authentic living serves as a mirror that reflects back your own moral compromises. This creates approach avoidance conflict. You're drawn to their integrity, but threatened by the implications for your own choices. What's particularly powerful is that INFJs don't preach or judge others for their compromises. They simply live their values quietly and consistently. This non-judgmental modeling is more psychologically influential than any lecture could be. You can dismiss someone's words, but you can't dismiss their lived example. Years later, when you face your own moral crossroads, you remember the INFJ who showed you that authentic living was possible. They become your reference point for what integrity looks like in practice. Even if you don't always choose the more authentic path, you're aware that it exists because you've seen someone walk it. The INFJ becomes unforgettable not because of what they said, but because of who they were willing to be. They demonstrated that humans can actually align their actions with their deepest values. And that demonstration permanently expands your understanding of human potential. But there is a darker side to this influence. When an INFJ lives with total conviction, it doesn't just inspire people, it actually disrupts their reality in a way that can be quite painful to witness. The strategic withdrawal when absence becomes presence. Perhaps the most psychologically devastating aspect of INFJ unforgettability is what happens when they leave. The INFJ door slam isn't just the end of a relationship, it's a masterclass in how absence can become more powerful than presence ever was. Here's what makes the INFJ withdrawal so uniquely memorable. It's complete. When most people end relationships, there's messiness. There are arguments, attempts at reconciliation, lingering contact, or gradual fade outs. The relationship dies slowly, giving your brain time to adjust and process the loss incrementally. But when an INFJ decides a relationship is over, they don't just leave, they disappear entirely. This creates what psychologists call sudden relationship termination trauma. Your brain was accustomed to a certain level of emotional connection and psychological stimulation from this person. Their insights, their validation, their unique way of seeing the world had become integrated into your daily mental landscape. Then suddenly, that entire dimension of your experience vanishes without warning. The neurological impact is profound. Your brain had formed specific neural pathways associated with this person, pathways that were particularly strong because of the depth of connection INFJs create. When someone gradually distances themselves, these pathways can slowly weaken through lack of use. But when someone disappears completely and abruptly, the pathways remain active, firing repeatedly as your brain searches for stimulation that's no longer available. This creates what researchers call phantom relationship syndrome, similar to phantom limb pain, where amputees continue to feel sensations in limbs that no longer exist. Your mind keeps reaching for the psychological connection that defined your relationship with the INFJ, but instead of gradual acceptance, you encounter a void that feels impossible to fill. The strategic nature of INFJ withdrawal amplifies this effect. They don't slam the door in anger, they close it with finality. There's no emotional outburst that you can analyze or respond to. There's no explanation that gives you closure. There's simply the recognition that they've decided the relationship no longer serves them and they're moving on with surgical precision. This clean break violates every expectation your brain has about how relationships end. You're left with no resolution, no final conversation, no opportunity to explain or apologize or negotiate. The relationship simply stops, leaving you with what psychologists call ambiguous loss, grief without closure, mourning without clear understanding of what exactly went wrong. The absence becomes more present than their physical presence ever was. You find yourself thinking about them constantly, not because you miss what you had, but because your brain is desperately trying to solve the puzzle of what happened. Every interaction gets replayed and reanalyzed. Every conversation gets dissected for clues about when they started pulling away. The person who used to occupy a specific space in your life now occupies your entire mental landscape. What makes this particularly unforgettable is the contrast between their total presence and complete absence. When INFJs are in relationship with you, they're fully invested. They remember everything about you, check in on your goals, notice changes in your mood, and demonstrate consistent care for your well-being. This level of attentiveness creates strong psychological dependence, not unhealthy dependence, but the natural human response to being genuinely cared for. Then that care disappears entirely. The person who knew you better than you knew yourself becomes completely unreachable. The validation that had become part of your psychological foundation vanishes without replacement. You're left feeling not just rejected, but psychologically orphaned. We've talked about why they stay in your head, but we haven't talked about the moment they disappear. This next step is the most devastating psychological imprint an INFJ can leave, and there is no coming back from it. The power of this withdrawal lies in its finality. On some level, that this person could return to your life and provide the same depth of connection they offered before. But you also know with equal certainty that they won't. The INFJ door slam isn't a temporary boundary, it's a permanent restructuring of their reality that no longer includes you. This creates a unique form of psychological haunting. The INFJ becomes more present in their absence than many people are in their presence, occupying mental space through the very act of refusing to occupy any space at all. Understanding why people can't erase INFJs reveals both the power and the burden of this rare personality type. The mirror effect, the Zeigarnik effect, deep validation, authentic living, and strategic withdrawal all combine to create psychological imprints that persist long after the relationship itself has ended. But this unforgettability comes with a warning. It attracts people seeking to be saved, fixed, or completed by someone else's depth. As an INFJ, your profound impact on others is your superpower, but remember that not everyone who can't forget you deserves access to the very qualities that make you unforgettable. If you want to continue the journey to understanding yourself or an INFJ in your life, click either of the following videos where we continue to unlock the secrets of the INFJ personality type.